Hello everyone, welcome to Bible Thoughts. I am Ryan Stover and I'm here to talk about Genesis chapter 6. It's probably one of the most well-known and famous chapters of the Bible, especially its content of Noah and the flood. But also it's an important story of faith, and that's where I want to kind of tap into more. I feel like a lot of people just tend to focus on the flood and whether it's true or not and what's the evidence, and they want to take a scientific approach to it. Of course, if they did, they'd know that it was true. But regardless of what science or not, well, science reveals the truth of it, I would say. But regardless of what skeptics and scoffers may say, we are called to trust and believe our God. I believe and I trust him because I love him and I know what he's done for me and what he will do for me as he continues to do for me. And so he said he brought upon a flood that destroyed the old earth and brought about this one. And there was reason in it because it's going to happen again, but differently. So I trust my God, and I trust that there was a flood, a global flood, not a local flood, as some may say, a global flood, and I do believe there is scientific evidence to point to this as well. If some of you are coming at this kind of new or uninformed, seashells found at the top of Mount Everest, the Grand Canyon, evolutionists like to say that it was eroded by a river for thousands, millions of years. But if a river was eroding it, then why not rain and weather? You know what I mean? It just doesn't make sense. But there is evidence of a canyon being created quite quickly. If you ever look at what happened of the Mount St. Helens eruption in America back in the day, when the lake at the base of the mountain filled up with trees and logs, it overflowed and spilled out, therefore creating a miniature Grand Canyon. And also the evidence of the mouth of the Grand Canyon, where the river comes into it, is lower than the top of it. So, water doesn't go uphill. So I think we can discount that right off the bat. But regardless of what anyone says, we are called to trust our God, and I trust my Father in heaven that there was a global flood, and I believe that true scientific evidence points to it as well. And we'll get into more details. There's lots of more things to point to, but also for us to believe in it and trust in it, it has to do with our faith. If we doubt the flood, we doubt God. And so we want to make sure that we are coming from a basis of trusting God first and having faith in God that this is true, and looking for the evidence, not, easily twisted and believing what non-believers say. So make sure our faith is with God and not with man. All right. Before we get started, there is one New Testament chapter and verses that I'd like to read off to you first. They are related, for they are a parallel to what God did, and we'll go from there. So first off, I'm going to turn to 2 Peter chapter 3. If you know where I'm going. All right, this is about Christ coming, but related to Christ coming, which is to come in the future. Starting with verse 2 in chapter 3. That you may be mindful of the words which were spoken before by the holy prophets, and of the commandment of us, the apostles of the Lord and Savior, the Old and New Testament, right? Knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, as we see today, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. Right? There's so many non-believers, atheists, so on and so forth. It doesn't matter. It's just, the scoffers simply ask, oh, if God's real, I want to talk to him. If God's real, I want to see him. But it's not like that. He's not a statue. He's not something physical that we are touching and praying to, right? Because that means we're putting God in our world, our physical world. He's outside of that, isn't he? So there's no reason for us to put him in our human perception when he is outside of it. So I think that's something that scoffers should understand, because they look foolish when they ask us that, don't they? I digress. For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, now reserved unto fire, against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. So, and that's what we're reading today. Chapter 6 of Genesis is the judgment of men by water, of ungodly men. So, and we're told, especially in Revelation, that this will happen again, but not with water, with fire. And again, as I mentioned before, that's why the conservatives, the Christians who do believe the Bible truthfully, are not that concerned or worried about global warming, in the sense that it's causing icebergs to melt and the sea lines to disappear. That may happen in small doses, but there's not going to be a total ice cap melting and the world's flooded into a water world or whatever. No, that's not what's going to happen. There is climate change, to where some places are getting hotter and others getting colder, and the climates of some places are switching and flipping and changing. Climate change, because they don't know what to call it now. As you know, it was called global warming, but now it's global cooling, global raining, global whatever. It is a concern. Don't get me wrong on that. It is a concern. We should be taking care of our earth that God has given us. Keep it safe, keep it clean for our children. Plain and simple. So climate change is real, but there is no coming flood, as God promised and demonstrated with the rainbow, as we'll read shortly later on. But he gives us a little bit of hope. Well, we have great hope in Christ, of course. But here it's mentioned, starting off with verse 10 of the same chapter, chapter 3. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. It's all going to burn. All of it. And that's why God tells us again and again not to be part of this world. This world is not of him. We are to be in it, serving him by helping others and reaching out to others. Yes. And this is no easy feat, especially us who've grown up with technology, watching TV all the time. It's very hard for us to leave our distractions and strictly adhere to God's commandment or what God has planned for us. We're so easily caught up in what's going on in the world, whether it be movies, television, special events, music, concerts, and so on. And it's something we have to overcome. to each their own. We have to do it our way, your way. But once you're able to make that decision and climb over that mountain of temptation, nostalgia, and such, oh, how free you will feel. So very free. But be careful. You can find yourself back on the other side of that mountain just as easily. So, be careful. Once you leave the things, make sure they are far from you. We must separate from the things of this world because it's all going to burn. So we must keep that in mind. Keep our souls and ourselves detoxed from the world so that we are more in tune with the Spirit and not blinded. Allow me to continue. Verse 11. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness? Looking for and hasting unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness. So don't focus, we should not be focused on the end times so much. Our hope is in the new earth and the new heavens, the new earth that is to come, where righteousness will dwell. That's what we should be seeking out, righteousness. Not, Jesus is coming, we got to find out the year, the time, the date. No. God doesn't tell us. Jesus can't even tell us. God has sealed it away from all flesh. So, I think we should stop looking, but we should always be ready. As Jesus said, he will come as a thief in the night. So, is he going to find you sober? Is he going to find you ready? Is he going to find faith left in you? So, we should be focusing on ourselves. Keeping our faith strong. Keeping ourselves in check. Keeping an eye on the sky. But it's not the focus of our ministry. Spread the gospel of Jesus to others. That's it. It's very simple. Not even trying to push the flood story as, it's scientifically accurate and true, look at the science. Again, sure, you might persuade some atheists or non-Christians to believe that there was a flood, but it doesn't mean that they're going to believe in God. They should believe in God first, and then they can see the flood and other things with new eyes. They can now filter the world through the Spirit. So they got to have God first. They need to have the Spirit first. All the other things will come to them. So make sure we focus on the right things when we share with others. But as the Bible says, also be ready to answer any questions that people may have. Because if someone were to come up to you curious about the flood stuff, maybe that's because they are curious of their place in the world, their beliefs, their religiousness, and it might be the turning point for them. But pushing others to know what you know is no different than the conspiracy theorists pushing flat earth. They think everyone should know what they know and believe it. And they just push, and they end up pushing people away. And that's not what we are to do. That's not what Jesus did. So make sure that we're sharing God's love, sharing the gospel with others who are willing to listen and take it in. So keep that in mind. It's good for us Christians to really just feel the love of God, but also know his judgment and how serious it is, and how our work for God should be equally serious. And perhaps it will light a fire under you to get to doing something. My YouTube channel is something, but hopefully in the near future I'll be able to apply more, do more. But for now, this is my stepping stone forward. Alright, so there we go. Genesis flood is about faith, but also parallel to what will come. So we should carefully look at things that happen in the Old Testament, because they're all parallel to what came after and what is to come. So the Old Testament is so important, so very important. So we must look at it carefully, especially as believers. If you're not a believer, hopefully it's catching your interest and building your curiosity. All right, with that said, I think I've treaded off the path a bit too far, but let's get back on there and get to Genesis 6. Now, I had to take a few notes for this, so you'll see me switching from my Bible to my notes. All right, starting off. Verse 1. And it came to pass, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Let's stop there. It's a lot to unpack. So, first up, sons of God lusted after the daughters of man. Who are the sons of God? Many tend to believe that these are fallen angels, angels who sinned against God and have came down. But later in the New Testament, those who are in righteousness, who have the Holy Spirit, are now sons of God. So, and we do know that Adam's lineage, his generations were the ones who walked with God, as we learned and know by Enoch and Noah, as well as Cain and Abel. And Cain was departed from the presence of God because of his sin. So the sons of God could simply be man, those who believed in God. So therefore they left God and lusted after women, in this case. Now, whether it be angels or man, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't, because the judgment that comes is on all flesh upon the earth. So man is at fault here. And we have evidence of it already, as if you've seen my past video talking about the generations of Cain. The last one on the list, his great-great-great-grandson. Of course, they probably still mingled and talked together since Cain lived so long. Started to take on multiple wives. And here we see God pointing this out, that they lusted after daughters of man and took all that they wished to take. So they took many wives. So lusting and greed devoured them. Now, of course, if some men are taking more wives and other men don't have any, they're going to be angry and upset, right? Or stealing each other's wives, Who knows what all happened, but we can assume the worst, because that's what it turned into. But the Lord said, my spirit will not always stride with man, will not always walk with man, because of those who walk away or are put out from him, like Cain, when they do a horrible sin and just have decided in their hearts that they have retreated from God. Hardened their heart against them. Now, Lord says this, that he will not strive with man, for that he is also flesh. Now, this is really important. What does he mean by flesh? Is it because we're mortal? Is it because flesh is sinful? Well, actually, in Galatians 5:16, in the New Testament, it says that flesh lusts against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. So flesh and spirit are in conflict with each other. And that's why God says this. He cannot always strive with man, for that he is also flesh. And if we let our flesh lust against the spirit, we are pushing God away, and he is not striding with us. But now, those of us who have the spirit, God is striding with us. But we know we have those days where we just, are weak. We don't pray. We don't talk to God. We sit down and watch TV or be tempted to do other things that give us pleasure in small doses that are never really satisfying. And slowly coming back to God. When we have those days, when we feel down or depressed, and it's hard to build up the strength to pray and to continue walking with God. We tend to push him away in those times. And that's all on us. He's ready to help us and uplift us, give us a big hug. It's us. Our flesh is what's pushing against the spirit. And so we must know of this conflict, be aware of it. And those of us who have the spirit, we do become more aware. Those who don't have the spirit of God are not aware at all. I know I didn't and couldn't. There's no way you can know. This is something that you just can't understand unless you are a true Christian, born again, with the Spirit of God flowing in you, however much you put it to use. So keep that in mind. Your flesh lusts against the Spirit. So keep up the fight daily. Keep that spirit strong and at the forefront of your fleshly desires. Now, after this, he says, yet his days shall be 120 years. Now, when God said this to Noah, he could simply say that in 120 years is when the flood will come. That's very likely. Probably so. But I decided to do some research, and now, of course, we know in this earth, man was living to be 600, 800, 900 and some years old. Quite impossible these days, isn't it? Impossible so much that we think of this as, well, some think of this as fantasy. But again, it's an earth long gone and forgotten. We are not going to understand or really know how man was able to live so long then. But we will live much longer than that in heaven, won't we? In the new heaven, on the new earth. So we have a better reward awaiting for us. But when he says his days shall be in 120 years, I was curious, is this really limited to a man's lifespan? Because throughout the Old Testament we see the age of man decreasing gradually. Every generation it just keeps dropping until it gets down to about this lifespan. And I decided to look it up, and despite how you feel about Wikipedia, they do have a long list of verified longevity of women and men, and women being having lived the longest, about 118, and I think the oldest man was 116. But there is one woman cataloged to be 122. But if you take what God said here to be in 120 years, it's technically true. We cannot live past 120 now. It's reached that limit. And now for one woman to get to 122, if that is to be correct, well, then perhaps she was blessed to be extended those 2 more years. Who knows, right? We don't know her story. But it's very interesting. If you look at that, with her aside, no other person has reached 120 years as of now. So, very interesting. It seems like God knew where we were headed. So, of course, he already knew. But very interesting for him to put that detail in there. All right. So, now we're going to go down to verse 4. And verse 4 has been talked about so much. Giants, Nephilim, as spoken in the NIV and others. Keep it simple. Giants. Right? Just tall, hulking men. Well, again, this can seem like fantasy to others, but if we are to believe the Bible, especially the story of David and Goliath, Goliath was a giant. Now, he wasn't like Jack and the Giant, of course. That's ridiculous. But he was very huge. And we have some, even celebrities, who have been known to be kind of giant-like. Some actors and stuff. Even the Guinness Book of Records have photos of very large men. And those could be the giant genes repressed for thousands of years, because eventually the main civilization of where the giants come from was annihilated. So, but there still can be a remnant, to pop up here and there. Probably never to what it was before, but, if we go back far enough, we can find that where something started. And so where did the giant gene come from? And we know that Goliath was a giant, and even his brother, and because it's talked about later on, I think in Kings or Chronicles, where they come across the brother of Goliath's bed, and they talk about how long it is. So there were giants. Now remember, Moses is telling Genesis. And so when he says that there were giants in those days and after, he's referring that there were even giants to be born after the flood. So that was a part of, the gene in people that was just there. No, maybe there were many that were giants before the flood, but as the weather and the climate and the earth changed completely, people could not be as large anymore, right? Just like we don't have large insects, especially of what we find in the fossil record, and large beasts and stuff like that, other than what we find in the ocean. So nothing can be gigantic anymore. So maybe people who lived at 900 years, maybe they were giants. They continue to grow somehow, right? It's very likely. We don't, because we have no official record now to compare it with. So it's very possible, very possible. But it's not too far-fetched for me to discredit it, right? And again, I trust the Bible. So there were giants in those days. Now, talking about the giants, God goes into when the sons of God bear children with the daughters of men. Now again, if we believe that the sons of God are angels, and then people are assuming that the angels having children created giants, it's still far-fetched, even though it could be something of that kind. But again, the Bible never reveals such thing, so it's all speculation. So keep that in mind, and we shouldn't be too caught up with it anyways. But allow me to continue. After the 120 years, and this is the giant part. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, When the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy men whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repents me that I have made them. So, one more pause there. So, again, God says that when the sons of God, these giants, bare children with the daughters of men, they became mighty men which were of old. Now, were of old, for me, it seems like it's talking about those who grew very, very old, lived very long, hundreds of years, as they did at that time. And men of renown, that means men of fame, widely honored, which is very interesting. That means they were very well known, and maybe some of the names that's been passed down from ancient civilizations, they could have been names of some of these men of renown. And and there's really no way of knowing, really, because God did a really good job of erasing this the old earth. And we're going to find some remnants, sure, but I would say not much is left at all. And we can keep digging and digging, but I don't think we're ever going to really find it, or find anything, because we're not meant to. And what's it going to do, right? Because any technology or knowledge from that time was probably going to lead us down a similar path, and it will just simply bring civilization closer to the flood of fire, right? Which is next to come. So I would say we should just leave it alone, right? Just as God did in the Bible. He just left it alone. Wasn't needful for us to know. But I do understand the temptation to try to understand and answer some of those questions that science simply cannot, because we don't have that environment anymore. So, with that said, let's move on to man's wickedness. The Lord said that the man's wickedness was great. Every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That is scary, because that means every person had a black heart. Only evil continually? Yikes. I don't want to see what that looks like. And then God said in verse 6, it repented the Lord that he had made man. And I looked up repented because it's not about regret here. It's more about him feeling sorrow, deep sadness for what he has to do. And of course, later in the verse it says that it and grieved him to his heart. So this made God very sad. He was filled with sorrow. He had made man, and they had to come to this end. It does. It's. Would you do that to your children? You created your children, and if your children became evil criminals, murderers, and you knew they had to die to save people, it would still suck, right? You just, sorry for my speech, but I would hate it, regardless of what they're doing or what they've done. So I see this as a parent dilemma for God. It's his children that he created. But now the greatest judgment, the greatest discipline must be administered, because there's no one will be left if he doesn't save Noah and his family and rid the world of the rest. So it was a necessity for him to do so, but it hurt. And if you're not parents, you will know once you are. And I would say being a parent helps you understand a lot more of what God does. So don't feel bad if some of this goes over your head, or you don't see eye to eye with me. It's okay. But it's important to also think of God as Father, as Jesus told us to pray to Him, our Father which art in heaven. So He is our Father, therefore we are His children. So for it to grieve Him to do this flood, it really hurt, and He had to do it, right? And so God says in verse 7, I will destroy man and beast and every creeping thing and fowls of the air. Everything that was able to breathe air out of its nostrils. Done. And He did. Now we'll get into Noah, starting with verse 8. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was just a man and perfect in his generations. And Noah walked with God. There we go. He was one of the few who walked with God. Especially in this time. And Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me. For the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So, it's kind of like vengeance from the earth, in a way. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Well, before we get into the ark, let's talk about Noah first. Alright, so Noah, there's a few things that really shed light on Noah. And like I said, the story of Noah and the flood is a story of faith. And we'll get into that. Because in Hebrew 11:7, talks about Noah. There we go. In Hebrews 11:7, this is the examples of faith. By faith, Noah, being warned of God of things not seen as yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by the which he condemned the world, and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. Right? Because Noah became the second Adam, the heir of the now civilization. We are his heirs. Noah is our long forgotten great, forever great grandfather. So, but with faith, after being warned of God of things that he could not see, he followed God's commands and did it. Trusted him. Didn't hesitate. So, very big example of faith here. The other one I have is in 2 Peter. Now we're jumping into 2 Peter again. If I don't go too far, because it gets lost in all of these named chapters. Like I said, even Jesus said that Noah was second Adam, but Jesus is is another Adam in and of himself, but he's the Adam of the Spirit for us. take that to heart and do our best as Christians